The day the storm came to Marysvale, Utah, a young woman with eyes like polished jade stood at her window and watched the sky turn a sickening shade of green. Sage Lockwood had always been considered peculiar by the townspeople, but today, as the first of the hailstones shattered against her porch like broken promises, she felt their suspicion turn to something darker. It was 1878, and the railroad had just reached their part of Utah territory, bringing with it new faces and old superstitions. Sage pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders and watched as the wind bent the cottonwoods along the creek, nearly double. Her small cabin at the edge of town offered little protection against the elements, but she had weatherproofed it as best she could with the skills her late father had taught her. The storm had been brewing for days, not just in the skies but in the town as well. Whispers followed her when she walked down Main Street to deliver her herbal remedies to Mrs. Holloway, whose arthritis flared something fierce with the changing weather. Sage tried to ignore them, but the eyes that tracked her movements felt heavier than usual. "Storm's coming," Old Man Peterson had said when she passed him on her way to the general store yesterday. But the way he'd said it like an accusation instead of a casual observation had made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Now, as thunder cracked overhead with such force it rattled her windows in their frames, Sage could only hope the storm would pass quickly and without too much destruction. Her garden, the source of many of her medicinal herbs and her primary livelihood, was sure to take a beating. The first rock that hit her door made her jump. The second one, larger than the first, was followed by angry voices. "Come out, witch!" someone shouted, the words nearly lost in another roll of thunder. Sage's heart hammered against her ribs. This was what she had feared since her grandmother had passed 3 years ago, leaving her alone with her unusual knowledge of plants and healing. What had been tolerated in an old woman became suspicious in a young one who lived alone and kept to herself. She peered through a gap in her curtains and saw a group of townspeople gathered in front of her cabin, their faces twisted with fear and anger. Sheriff Tate was among them, but he made no move to disperse the crowd. Instead, he stood with his arms crossed, watching. "We know what you are, Mrs." Simmons shrieked, her voice rising above the storm. "The crops are ruined. My husband's barn collapsed. God's punishment for harboring a witch." Sage felt sick. The drought that had plagued Marysvale for months had finally broken, but the violent storm that replaced it was apparently her doing as well. She couldn't win. Another rock, this one smashing through her front window. Glass shattered across her floor, and the wind howled through the opening, sending her curtains dancing like ghosts. Sage backed away, grabbing her father's old rifle from above the mantel. She had never fired it at anything but rabbits and the occasional coyote, but she wouldn't let them drag her out to whatever fate they had in mind. She had heard stories of women accused of witchcraft, even in these supposedly modern times, ducked in ponds until they drowned, hanged from trees, beaten to death by fearful neighbors. She was loading the rifle when her back door burst open. Sage whirled around, raising the weapon with shaking hands. A man stood in her doorway, soaked to the skin and breathing hard. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto the worn floorboards of her kitchen. He raised his hands slowly when he saw the rifle. "I'm not here to hurt you, miss," he said, his voice low and steady despite the chaos outside. "Name's Lucas Jackson. I've got a wagon around back. We need to get you out of here before that mob decides to do more than throw rocks." Sage kept the rifle trained on him. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." His blue eyes, startlingly clear in his weather-beaten face, held hers. "I know enough to recognize a bunch of scared fools blaming their troubles on the nearest convenient target." A crash from the front of the house made them both jump. "We don't have much time. Will you come, or would you rather take your chances with them?" Another rock came through a second window. Someone was trying the front door now, the handle rattling violently. "Fine," Sage said, lowering the rifle slightly. "But if this is a trick, it's no trick," Lucas said, glancing nervously toward the front of the house. "Grab what you need, quickly." Sage hesitated only a moment longer before moving with swift efficiency. She grabbed her medical bag, already packed with her most precious herbs and tinctures, and stuffed a change of clothes into it. She took the small box where she kept what little money she had, along with her mother's locket and her father's pocket watch. Lucas was still by the door, watching the storm outside. Rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the dirt of her back garden to mud. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Of course I can ride," she replied, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I grew up here," he nodded. "Good. I've got 2 horses hitched to a wagon, but if we need to make a quick escape, we might need to abandon it and ride bareback." The pounding at her front door grew more insistent. Wood splintered, they were breaking in. "Time to go," Lucas said, grabbing her arm. They dashed out into the rain, the mud sucking at their boots. Around the side of her cabin, partially sheltered by a stand of pine trees, was a small wagon with 2 horses harnessed to it. The animals were nervous, eyes rolling as lightning flashed overhead. Lucas helped her up onto the seat and then swung himself up beside her. He took the reins and gave them a sharp snap. The horses lurched forward just as the first of the townspeople rounded the corner of her cabin. "There she is." Someone shouted, but their voice was almost completely drowned out by a deafening crack of thunder. Lucas urged the horses faster, away from town and toward the foothills that rose to the east. The wagon bounced violently over the rutted path, and Sage had to hold on tight to avoid being thrown. She looked back once to see several men running after them, but they quickly fell behind, unwilling to pursue too far in such weather. Rain lashed at her face, and she was soaked through within minutes. The storm seemed to be worsening, if that was possible. Visibility was poor, and Lucas was guiding the horses mostly by instinct and memory. "Where are we going?" Sage shouted over the storm. "I've got a place," Lucas shouted back. "It's not much, but it's dry and defensible." They rode for what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one. The rain began to slacken, though the sky remained ominously dark. They had climbed higher into the foothills, leaving the valley where Marysvale sat below them. Finally, Lucas guided the horses onto a narrow trail that Sage would have missed entirely if she'd been alone. The trees were thicker here, offering some protection from the elements. After another few minutes, a small cabin came into view nestled among the pines. "Is this yours?" Sage asked as they pulled up in front of it. Lucas nodded. "Been building it piece by piece whenever I'm not working." "Not many folks know about it." He jumped down from the wagon and came around to help her, but Sage had already climbed down by herself. "I can manage," she said, though her legs felt unsteady after the wild ride. Lucas nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her independence. "Let's get the horses settled, and then we can dry off." Together they unhitched the team and led them to a small lean-to shelter attached to the side of the cabin. Lucas produced some oats from a bin there and gave each horse a portion, then rubbed them down with some old burlap sacks. "They'll be all right here," Sage asked, patting one of the horses on the neck. "They've weathered worse," Lucas replied. "Come on, let's get inside before we catch our deaths." The interior of the cabin was simple but neat. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Lucas immediately set about starting a fire. There was a small table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, and shelves holding various supplies. Sage stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly uncertain. She had just fled her home with a stranger, a man she had never seen before today. What did she really know about him? As if sensing her thoughts, Lucas spoke without turning from his task. "I'm not going to hurt you, Miss Lockwood. I know my word doesn't mean much to you right now, but it's all I've got to offer." The fire caught, and he carefully added more kindling. "I've been working as a ranch hand for the Hendersons the past 2 months. I saw you in town a few times, heard the talk. Didn't think much of it until today when I overheard some men at the saloon talking about teaching you a lesson before the storm hit." "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Sage asked, hugging her arms around herself. She was beginning to shiver. Lucas finally turned to look at her, firelight flickering across his features. He wasn't a handsome man in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face, a quiet strength in the set of his jaw, a kindness around his eyes that belied his rough exterior. "My sister was accused of similar nonsense back in Nebraska," he said quietly. "No one stood up for her. I won't make that mistake again." He gestured to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "There should be some dry clothes in there. They'll be too big, but they're clean. I'll step outside while you change." Before she could respond, he had grabbed a slicker from a peg by the door and gone back out into the rain. Sage stood for a moment, then moved to the trunk. Inside, she found several shirts and pairs of trousers, all clearly belonging to a man considerably larger than herself. She selected the smallest shirt she could find and a pair of trousers, then quickly stripped off her sodden clothes. The shirt hung almost to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers up several times and secure them with a piece of rope she found, but at least they were dry. She hung her wet things near the fire, hoping they would dry by morning. A knock at the door announced Lucas's return. "Decent." He called. "Yes," she replied, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. He came in, carrying an armload of firewood. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, but he made no comment as he stacked the wood near the fireplace. "The storm's moving off," he said, removing his slicker and hanging it by the door. "But I reckon it's best if we stay put until morning. Those folks might still be riled up enough to come looking for you." Sage nodded, moving closer to the fire to warm herself. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to help me," Lucas shrugged. "Couldn't very well leave you to face that mob alone." He moved to a small cupboard and pulled out a tin of coffee and a pot. "Coffee, please." They were silent as he prepared the coffee, filling the pot with water from a bucket and setting it at the edge of the fire to boil. Sage took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He moved with an easy confidence, his actions economical and precise. His hands were calloused, the nails blunt but clean. "A working man's hands. How long have you been in Marysvale?" she asked. "Like I said, about 2 months," he replied, measuring coffee into the pot once the water boiled. "Came west from Nebraska looking for work. The Hendersons needed someone who could break horses, and that's something I've got a knack for." He poured the coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to her. "What about you? You said you grew up here." Sage wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Yes, my family came here when I was very young. My father worked in the silver mines until he died 5 years ago. My grandmother raised me after that, taught me about plants and healing. When she died, I carried on her work." She took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee. "People were wary but accepting of my grandmother's ways. With me, the tolerance has been wearing thin. People fear what they don't understand," Lucas said, leaning against the table. "And when bad things happen, they look for someone to blame." "I don't cause storms," Sage said, a flash of anger in her voice. "I can't control the weather any more than they can." "I know that," Lucas said gently. "But fear isn't rational, and you're different. You live alone, you heal with plants instead of doctor's medicine, you keep to yourself. That's enough to make you suspicious in some people's eyes." Sage sighed, staring into her coffee. "What will I do now? I can't go back." "Not right away," Lucas agreed. "Let things cool down first. Sheriff Tate's not a bad man, just weak-willed. Once folks calm down, he might be able to reason with them. And if he can't," Lucas looked at her steadily, "then we'll figure something else out." The way he said, "we" made Sage glance up sharply. "I don't want to be your responsibility, Mr. Jackson." A small smile touched his lips. "Lucas, please, and it's not about responsibility. It's about doing what's right." They finished their coffee in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the diminishing patter of rain on the roof. Outside, the storm had indeed moved on, though distant thunder could still be heard. "You should take the bed," Lucas said, standing and stretching. "I'll make do by the fire." "I couldn't put you out of your bed," Sage protested. "You're not putting me out, I'm offering," he countered. "Besides, I've slept on worse than a cabin floor." Too exhausted to argue further, Sage nodded. "Thank you for everything." Lucas simply nodded in return, then busied himself making a pallet on the floor with some blankets from the trunk. Sage moved to the small bed in the corner and slipped under the quilt. It smelled of pine and wood smoke, not unpleasant. Despite her worry about what the future held, she found herself drifting off almost immediately, lulled by the dying fire and the soft sounds of Lucas moving about the cabin. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that, for the first time since her grandmother died, she wasn't completely alone. Dawn broke clear and cool after the storm. Sage awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous night came flooding back. She sat up quickly, finding Lucas at the small stove cooking breakfast. "Morning," he said, glancing over at her. "Thought you might be hungry." Sage pushed a strand of hair from her face, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. "Thank you, I am actually." She slipped out of bed, still wearing his oversized clothes. "I should check if my things are dry." Her dress and petticoats were still damp, but wearable. She took them and retreated behind a blanket Lucas had thoughtfully hung across one corner of the cabin to give her privacy. When she emerged, properly dressed once more, he had breakfast waiting on the table. "I need to go into town," Lucas said as they ate. "Check on the horses at the Henderson place, see what damage the storm did, and find out what folks are saying about last night." Sage felt a flutter of panic. "You're leaving me here. It's the safest place for you right now," Lucas assured her. "No one knows about this cabin except me. I won't tell a soul where you are, and I'll be back before sundown with supplies and news." She wanted to protest but knew he was right. "Be careful." "If they suspect you helped me, I'll be careful," he promised. "Just stay here, stay inside. There's more coffee and some jerky if you get hungry again." After he'd gone, taking one of the horses and leaving the other in the lean-to, Sage explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was a bachelor's dwelling, certainly, but surprisingly comfortable. Lucas had built it well. The walls were solid, the roof didn't leak despite the deluge the night before, and he'd even added small touches like shelves for books, though he had only 3 and a window box for plants. She found herself wondering about him, this man who had risked himself to save a stranger. What had happened to his sister in Nebraska? Why had he come west alone? Did he have a sweetheart somewhere? The day passed slowly. Sage tidied the already neat cabin, mended a tear in her sleeve with a needle and thread she found, and spent some time outside in the lean-to with the remaining horse, a gentle mare who seemed to enjoy the company. By the time the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Sage was pacing nervously. Lucas should have been back by now. What if something had happened to him? What if the townspeople had somehow discovered his role in her escape? She was just considering going after him when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by caution. She grabbed the rifle, which Lucas had left leaning by the door, and waited. But it was Lucas who appeared on the trail, his horse loaded with supplies. When he saw her in the doorway with the rifle, he raised an eyebrow. "Expecting trouble? I was worried," she admitted, lowering the weapon. "You were gone longer than I expected." "Had to be careful," he said, dismounting. "Didn't want anyone following me back here." He began unloading packages from the horse. "Here, help me with these. I've got food, some clothes for you, and news not all of it good." Once inside, supplies unpacked and the horse tended to, Lucas sat heavily at the table. He looked tired, and there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there that morning. "Tell me," Sage said, sitting across from him. "The storm did a lot of damage," he began. "Henderson's best bull was killed by lightning, the church steeple came down, and 6 homes lost their roofs, including the mayor's." Sage felt sick. No wonder they had been so angry. "Your cabin's still standing," Lucas continued, "but it's been ransacked. Anything you left behind is probably gone or destroyed." She closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the small mementos of her parents and grandmother that she hadn't had time to grab. "And the townspeople," Lucas hesitated. "They're still riled up. Sheriff Tate has issued a warrant for your arrest for witchcraft, if you can believe it. It's not even a legal charge, but that hasn't stopped him. There's a reward for information on your whereabouts. And did anyone suspect you?" "Old man Peterson mentioned seeing a wagon leaving your place during the storm, but he couldn't tell who was driving. I kept my head down, did my work at Henderson's, acted just as shocked as everyone else about the witch escaping." He ran a hand through his hair. "I did hear one piece of good news, though. Doc Wilson spoke up for you at the town meeting, said there was nothing witchy about herbal medicine and that your grandmother had saved his wife's life years ago with one of her remedies. Dr. Wilson was always kind to me," Sage said softly. "Not that it seems to have helped much. It's a start," Lucas said. "Give it time. People's tempers cool, especially when they have rebuilding to focus on." "How much time?" Sage asked. "I can't hide in your cabin forever, Lucas." He looked at her steadily. "No, you can't. But you can stay until it's safe. A week, maybe 2. He gestured to the packages he'd brought. I bought you some things in Cedar City, went there after Marysvale to avoid suspicion. Clothes, some personal items I thought you might need, and I picked up a newspaper. There's talk of a doctor in Salt Lake City who's looking for someone with knowledge of herbal medicine to assist him. Might be an opportunity for you once things settle down. Sage was momentarily speechless. You went to Cedar City. That's over 30 miles. Like I said, had to be careful, Lucas replied with a shrug. Couldn't buy women's things in Marysvale without raising eyebrows. I'll pay you back, she said, looking at the packages. As soon as I can access my money, no need, Lucas cut her off. Consider it an investment in your future practice in Salt Lake City. His confidence that she had a future beyond hiding in his cabin touched her deeply. Thank you, she said simply, unable to express the full extent of her gratitude. You're welcome. He stood, stretching his back. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Let's see what we can make for dinner with these supplies. They settled into a routine over the next few days. Lucas would go to work at the Henderson Ranch, careful to maintain his normal habits so as not to arouse suspicion, then return to the cabin in the evening. Sage spent her days organizing the herbs she had managed to bring with her, writing down recipes and remedies from memory before she could forget them, and making the cabin more comfortable. Despite the circumstances, Sage found herself enjoying Lucas's company. He was quiet but thoughtful, with a dry wit that often surprised her into laughter. He listened when she explained the properties of different plants, asking intelligent questions. And he told her stories of his travels, of the places he'd seen since leaving Nebraska 5 years earlier. Why Marysvale? She asked him one evening as they sat by the fire. Of all the places you've been, why settle here? Lucas poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks up the chimney. Wasn't planning to settle permanently, just needed work and Henderson was hiring. Thought I'd stay the summer, move on before winter, he glanced at her. Now I'm not so sure, because of me, Sage asked, a strange fluttering in her chest. Partly, he admitted. Feel responsible for seeing this through, making sure you're safe. He paused, then added more quietly, and I've come to enjoy your company. Sage felt her cheeks warm. I've enjoyed yours as well, she said softly. The look he gave her then made the fluttering in her chest intensify, but he simply nodded and returned his attention to the fire. A week passed, then another. Lucas continued to bring news from town, which was mostly unchanged. The arrest warrant still stood, though the active searching had died down as people focused on rebuilding after the storm. Dr. Wilson had continued to speak in Sage's defense, joined now by Mrs. Holloway, whose arthritis had worsened without Sage's remedies. During this time, Sage and Lucas grew closer. They worked together to improve the cabin, built a proper garden plot where Sage could grow some of her herbs, and spent evenings talking by the fire. Sage found herself looking forward to his return each day, missing him when he was gone in a way that both surprised and frightened her. I'm going to town tomorrow, Sage announced one evening, nearly 3 weeks after the night of the storm. Lucas looked up sharply from the boot he was mending. That's not safe yet. I can't hide forever, Lucas, she said firmly, and I need to face them. If I run away to Salt Lake City without confronting this, I'll always be running. They could hurt you, he argued, putting down the boot. Sheriff Tate might actually try to arrest you. Then I'll deal with that, Sage replied, but I won't live in fear. My grandmother wouldn't have, and neither will I. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then sighed. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Thank you, she said with a small smile. It wasn't a compliment, he grumbled, but there was a reluctant admiration in his eyes. Fine, but I'm going with you. Won't that make people suspicious? Don't care, he said flatly. I'm not letting you walk into that town alone. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Sage dressed carefully in one of the new dresses Lucas had bought her in Cedar City, a simple blue calico that was practical but flattering. She braided her hair and pinned it up neatly, determined to present a respectable appearance. Lucas was equally particular about his appearance, shaving carefully and wearing his cleanest shirt. They rode into town on the 2 horses, Sage side saddle on the gentle mare. They had decided against taking the wagon, as it would be more conspicuous and harder to make a quick escape if necessary. Marysvale was quiet when they arrived, the usual morning bustle subdued. Evidence of the storm's damage was still visible. The church steeple was a jagged stub. Several buildings had patched roofs, and the hitching post in front of the saloon had been replaced with a new one. Heads turned as they rode down Main Street. Whispers followed them, and people stopped what they were doing to stare. Lucas rode close beside Sage, his face set in an expression that discouraged anyone from approaching too near. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sage dismounted without waiting for Lucas's help, squaring her shoulders as she faced the building. Lucas quickly tied their horses and moved to her side. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." She took a deep breath and walked up the steps. Sheriff Tate was at his desk when they entered. He looked up, surprise turning quickly to a frown. "Miss Lockwood, didn't expect to see you walking in here voluntarily." "I understand there's a warrant for my arrest," Sage said calmly. "I've come to address it." Tate's eyes flicked to Lucas, then back to Sage. "And what's Jackson got to do with this?" "He's a friend," Sage replied simply. Tate leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "You know half the town thinks you caused that storm with some kind of witchcraft." "I'm aware of their superstitions," Sage said. "But surely you, as a man of the law, know that's nonsense." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "What I know is that folks were mighty upset about the damage. They needed someone to blame. And I was convenient," Sage finished for him. "Sheriff, I'm not a witch. I'm a healer. I use plants and knowledge passed down from my grandmother who learned it from her mother. There's nothing magical or sinister about it." "Then where have you been hiding these past weeks?" Tate asked. "Looks to me like someone with a guilty conscience." "Someone with a sense of self-preservation," Lucas spoke up, his voice hard. "Would you have faced that mob on the night of the storm, Sheriff, or would you have run too?" Tate flushed. "Watch your tone, Jackson." "My point," Sage interjected before Lucas could respond, "is that I've done nothing wrong. I didn't cause the storm. I can't control the weather. I'm simply a woman who lives alone and practices herbal medicine, neither of which is a crime." Sheriff Tate rubbed his jaw, looking uncomfortable. "Be that as it may, there's still the matter of the warrant. On what grounds?" Lucas challenged. "Witchcraft isn't even a legal charge anymore. This isn't Salem in 1692. It's disturbing the peace," Tate amended quickly, "and fleeing the scene of a disturbance." "A disturbance caused by a mob threatening an innocent woman," Lucas countered. Tate held up his hands. "Look, I'm just doing my job here. The mayor insisted on the warrant." "Then perhaps I should speak to the mayor," Sage suggested. Before Tate could respond, the door opened and Dr. Wilson walked in. He stopped short when he saw Sage and Lucas. "Miss Lockwood, thank goodness you're safe," he said, genuine relief in his voice. "I've been worried about you since that night." He turned to Sheriff Tate. "I see our local healer has returned. I trust you're not planning to actually enforce that ridiculous warrant, Sheriff." Tate looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Doc, you know it's not up to me." "Actually, it is," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "And I'm telling you as the town's physician that Miss Lockwood is no witch. She's a skilled herbalist whose remedies have helped dozens of people in this town, including your own mother's rheumatism, if I recall correctly." The sheriff had the grace to look embarrassed. "I know that, Doc, but the mayor can take it up with me," Dr. Wilson interrupted. "In the meantime, I suggest you tear up that warrant before you make Marysvale the laughingstock of the territory. Arresting a woman for witchcraft in 1878, we'd never live it down." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sheriff Tate sighed heavily, opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. He made a show of tearing it in half. "Fine, but I can't guarantee your safety, Miss Lockwood. There are still folks who are mighty upset." "I'll take my chances," Sage said, relief washing through her. "Thank you, Sheriff. Dr. Wilson." "Don't thank me," Tate grumbled. "Just try to keep a lower profile, will you, and find yourself a husband. Folks are less suspicious of a married woman." Lucas stiffened beside her, but Sage merely nodded politely. "I'll take that under advisement. Outside, Doctor." Wilson walked with them to their horses. "I'm glad to see you back, Miss Lockwood," he said. "Mrs. Holloway has been asking after you daily. Her joints are giving her fits without your willow bark tincture." "I'll prepare some for her right away," Sage promised. "Thank you for speaking up for me, Doctor, both today and at the town meeting." Nonsense. Dr. Wilson waved away her thanks. We healers must stick together. And besides, I've seen the results of your work firsthand. There's nothing supernatural about it, just good knowledge and careful preparation. He glanced at Lucas. And it seems you've found yourself a staunch defender as well. Lucas nodded respectfully to the doctor but said nothing. Will you be returning to your cabin? Dr. Wilson asked Sage. She hesitated. I'm not sure yet. I need to assess the damage first. Understood. Well, if you need anything, my door is always open to you. With a tip of his hat, the doctor continued down the street. Lucas untied their horses, keeping his voice low. That went better than I expected, but we're still drawing a lot of attention. Indeed, people had gathered on the boardwalk across the street, watching them with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Let's check my cabin, Sage suggested. Then we can decide what to do next. They rode to the edge of town where Sage's small cabin stood. From the outside, it looked much the same, though one of the front windows was still broken. Covered with a piece of canvas that flapped in the breeze, Sage dismounted and approached the door with trepidation. It wasn't locked. The lock had been broken in the raid and swung open at her touch. The interior was worse than she had feared. Her furniture had been overturned, shelves torn from walls, her carefully organized herbs and tinctures smashed or scattered. Someone had taken an axe to her table, splitting it nearly in half. Oh, she said softly, taking in the destruction. Lucas came up behind her, his intake of breath sharp when he saw the state of the cabin. Sage, I'm so sorry. She moved through the wreckage, picking up a shattered clay pot here, a torn book there. Most of her possessions were beyond salvaging. Even her mattress had been slashed open, the stuffing pulled out and scattered. They were thorough, she said, her voice steady despite the pain she felt. I suppose they were looking for evidence of witchcraft. They were being malicious, Lucas corrected, anger evident in his tone. This wasn't a search, it was revenge, Sage nodded, unable to disagree. She continued her inspection, looking for anything that might be saved. In a corner, partially hidden under the remains of a shelf, she found a small wooden box. It had been her grandmother's, used to store special seeds. Miraculously, it was intact, though the seeds inside were gone. At least I have this, she murmured, clutching the box to her chest. Lucas was examining the structure of the cabin. The building itself is sound, he said after a while. The walls and roof are fine. It's just the contents that were destroyed. Small mercies, Sage replied, trying for a lightness she didn't feel. We could repair it, Lucas suggested. I'm handy with carpentry, new furniture, new shelves. It would take some time, but I don't know if I want to stay here, Sage interrupted, surprised by her own words. Even if we fixed everything, I don't know if I could feel safe here again. Lucas was quiet for a moment. What about Salt Lake City, the doctor looking for an assistant? Sage looked around the ruins of her home, the place where she had grown up, where her parents and grandmother had lived. The thought of leaving was painful, but the thought of staying amid so much fear and suspicion was worse. Perhaps, she said finally, or perhaps somewhere else entirely. Somewhere I could start fresh. Wherever you decide, Lucas said, his voice gentle, I'd like to help you get there. Sage looked at him, really looked at him. In the weeks they had spent together, he had become more than just her rescuer. He was her friend, her confidant, perhaps even something more that she wasn't ready to name yet. Why? She asked simply. Lucas held her gaze. Because in all my travels, I've never met anyone quite like you. Because you face down fear with courage, because you heal instead of harm, even when others try to hurt you. He took a step closer to her. And because when I'm with you, the world seems brighter, like the sun coming out after a storm. Sage's breath caught in her throat. Lucas, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just offering to help, as a friend if that's all you want. Before she could respond, a voice called from outside. Miss Lockwood, you in there? They both turned to see Mrs. Holloway standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her cane. The older woman's eyes widened as she took in the state of the cabin. Oh, my dear, she said, dismay in her voice. What they've done to your home, it's shameful, simply shameful. Mrs. Holloway, Sage greeted her, setting down the wooden box and going to help the older woman into the cabin. You shouldn't have walked all this way with your arthritis. Nonsense, Mrs. Holloway waved away her concern. When I heard you were back in town, I had to come see you. My joints have been giving me fits without your remedies." She cast a suspicious glance at Lucas. "Who's this young man?" "Lucas Jackson, madam," Lucas introduced himself with a respectful nod. "I work for the Hendersons, HMPH, and what are you doing here with Miss Lockwood?" The older woman asked directly. "He's been helping me, Mrs. Holloway," Sage explained. "He's a friend, Mrs." Holloway studied Lucas for a moment, then gave a short nod. "Well, any friend of Sage's is welcome, I suppose." She turned back to Sage. "Now, about my joints, I'll make you a fresh tincture," Sage promised. "But it will take time to gather the ingredients. Most of my supplies have been destroyed." Mrs. Holloway looked around the cabin again, her expression hardening. "This town should be ashamed of itself. Your grandmother helped these people for 40 years, and this is how they repay her legacy." She thumped her cane on the floor for emphasis. "I've been telling anyone who'll listen that you're no witch, just a healer like your grandmother before you, and I'm not the only one. The widow Jenkins and her daughters are on your side, and so is Mr. Finch from the bank." "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway," Sage said, touched by the older woman's support. "That means a great deal to me." "Well, what are you going to do now?" Mrs. Holloway asked bluntly. "You can't stay here like this." "I'm considering my options," Sage replied carefully. Mrs. Holloway narrowed her eyes. "You're thinking of leaving, aren't you? Can't say I blame you after this." She gestured to the destruction around them. "But before you decide, you should know there's to be a town meeting tonight. Dr. Wilson called for it to address what happened to you. Says it's time the town faced its shame and made amends." "A town meeting," Sage repeated, surprised. "Yes, at the church at 7 o'clock. What's left of the church anyway," Mrs. Holloway added with a snort. "Seems fitting, doesn't it? Them sitting under a broken roof while they discuss how they wronged you." Lucas spoke up. "Will Mayor Blackburn be there?" "Oh yes," Mrs. Holloway said with a gleam in her eye. "The good doctor made quite sure of that, went to his house personally to insist on it." She turned back to Sage. "You should come, my dear, show them you're not afraid, and bring your young man with you." "He's not my," Sage began, but Mrs. Holloway was already making her way toward the door. 7 o'clock, the older woman reminded her. "Don't be late. And if you could have something for my joints before then, I'd be most grateful." After Mrs. Holloway had gone, Lucas turned to Sage. "Are you going to go?" Sage looked around the wreckage of her cabin once more. "Yes," she decided. "I need to hear what they have to say before I make any decisions about my future." "Then I'll be right there with you," Lucas said firmly. They spent the rest of the day salvaging what they could from the cabin. Sage was able to find enough undamaged herbs to make a simple remedy for Mrs. Holloway, which Lucas delivered to her home. They returned to Lucas's cabin in the foothills to clean up before the town meeting. As 7 o'clock approached, Sage felt her nervousness growing. She changed back into the blue calico dress, ran a comb through her hair, and pinned it up neatly once more. Lucas waited outside, giving her privacy, and when she emerged from the cabin, he looked at her with such warmth in his eyes that her nervousness briefly gave way to a different kind of flutter. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. "As ready as I'll ever be." The church was nearly full when they arrived. As they entered, a hush fell over the crowd and all eyes turned to them. Sage held her head high, though she could feel herself trembling slightly. Lucas placed his hand over hers where it rested on his arm, a silent show of support. Dr. Wilson, standing at the front of the church, nodded to them and gestured to 2 empty seats in the front row. Sage hesitated, then allowed Lucas to lead her forward. They sat down just as Mayor Blackburn entered from a side door, followed by Sheriff Tate. "Let's get this meeting started," the mayor said, his voice carrying through the damaged church. "I understand we're here to discuss the matter of Miss Lockwood and the unfortunate events following the storm." "Unfortunate events is putting it mildly, Harold," Dr. Wilson said dryly. "We're here to discuss how this town allowed a mob to threaten an innocent woman and destroy her home based on nothing more than superstition and fear." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mayor Blackburn looked uncomfortable. "Now, Wilson, you know it wasn't that simple. People were upset after the storm, and Miss Lockwood has always been different." "Different how?" Dr. Wilson challenged. "Because she lives alone. Because she uses herbs to heal rather than bleeding patients like doctors did not 50 years ago. Or because she's a young, unmarried woman with the audacity to be self-sufficient, more murmurs, some sounding agreeable. The point is, the mayor continued, no one was seriously hurt and no one was hurt. Mrs. Holloway stood up, leaning on her cane. What do you call destroying everything a person owns? What do you call forcing someone to flee their home in fear for their life? She pointed a gnarled finger at the mayor. Would you say no one was hurt if it had been your daughter, Harold Blackburn? The mayor had no immediate response to that. Sheriff Tate cleared his throat. Perhaps Miss Lockwood would like to address the town herself. All eyes turned to Sage. For a moment she wasn't sure she could speak, but then she felt Lucas's reassuring presence beside her, and she stood. I was born in this town, she began, her voice quiet but steady. My family has lived here for 3 generations. My father died in the mines working to bring prosperity to Marysvale. My grandmother spent her life healing the sick among you, delivering your babies, easing your pains, sitting with your dying. She paused, looking around at the faces watching her. Some looked ashamed, others defiant, many simply uncertain. I have never wished harm on anyone in this town, she continued. I cannot cause storms or blight crops or sicken cattle. I am not a witch, I am a healer. I use the knowledge my grandmother passed to me to help others, just as she did. That is all. Then why do you keep to yourself so much? Someone called from the back. Why all the secrecy with your remedies? There is no secrecy, Sage replied. Anyone who has asked I have taught, few have asked. As for keeping to myself after my grandmother died, I was alone. I had my work, my garden, my books. I did not realize that preferring solitude was cause for suspicion. What about the storm? Another voice called. It hit right after you argued with Peterson about his fence encroaching on your land. I have no control over the weather, Sage said firmly. The storm would have come whether I argued with Mr. Peterson or not. It damaged my garden as surely as it damaged his fields. Enough of this nonsense, Dr. Wilson interrupted. We've had storms before Miss Lockwood was born, and we'll have them long after we're all gone. What matters is how this town behaved like a pack of superstitious fools from the Dark Ages, not citizens of a modern nation in 1878. Mayor Blackburn held up his hands for quiet. All right, all right. Perhaps things got out of hand that night. Emotions were running high because of the storm damage. And what about the damage to Miss Lockwood's cabin? Lucas spoke up, his voice hard. Was that emotions running high too, or was it plain malice? The mayor had the grace to look uncomfortable. The destruction of private property is, of course, unacceptable. Those responsible should come forward. Silence fell over the church. No one moved. As I suspected, Dr. Wilson said grimly. Brave enough to destroy a woman's home, but not brave enough to admit it. What matters now, Mayor Blackburn said hastily, is what we do going forward. Miss Lockwood has returned to town. The question is, what does the town owe her for the injustice done to her? Justice would be nice, Sage said quietly. But I'd settle for being left in peace to rebuild my life whether here or elsewhere. You're considering leaving. The question came from Widow Jenkins, sitting near the middle of the church. I am, Sage admitted. My home has been destroyed and many in this town still look at me with suspicion. I'm not sure there's a place for me here anymore. That would be Marysvale's loss, Dr. Wilson said firmly. A healer of your skill is not easily replaced, as many of your patients have discovered in your absence. Mrs. Holloway stood again. I propose that the town pay to rebuild Miss Lockwood's cabin and replace what was destroyed. It's the least we can do to make amends. A chorus of voices rose, some in agreement, others protesting. The town coffers are already strained from storm repairs. It's only right we fix what was wrongfully destroyed. Why should those of us who weren't part of the mob pay? Mayor Blackburn banged his gavel for order. One at a time, please. Lucas stood then, commanding attention with his height and the intensity of his expression. If I may, he said, his voice carrying over the din. Miss Lockwood doesn't need charity. What she needs is respect and safety. If the town truly wants to make amends, start by acknowledging that she has as much right to live here as anyone. Start by standing against ignorance and superstition when you see it, not just when it's convenient. His words were met with silence. then a slow nodding of heads throughout the church. "Well said, young man," Dr. Wilson agreed, "but material support would also be appropriate, given the circumstances." The debate continued for another hour. In the end, a compromise was reached. The town would provide materials to repair Sage's cabin, volunteers would help with the labor, and a public apology would be issued by Mayor Blackburn on behalf of the town. Additionally, Dr. Wilson proposed that Sage be officially recognized as Marysvale's herbalist, working in cooperation with him to provide medical care to the community. As the meeting dispersed, many townspeople came to speak to Sage personally. Some offered apologies, others simply welcomed her back. A few still kept their distance, but they were the minority. "Well," Lucas said as they walked out of the church together, "that went better than I expected." "Yes," Sage agreed, feeling dazed by the turn of events. "I never thought they would. I expected more resistance." "People can surprise you," Lucas said, offering her his arm again. "For better or worse." They walked in silence for a while, heading back toward the edge of town where they had left their horses. "What will you do now?" Lucas asked finally. "Will you stay in Marysvale?" Sage considered the question carefully. "I think I will, at least for a while. Give them a chance to make good on their promises, and there are people here who need my help." She glanced up at him. "What about you? Will you stay at the Henderson Ranch for the time being?" he replied. "Though I've been thinking about buying some land of my own. There's a small parcel for sale not far from your cabin with good water and grazing." He hesitated, then added, "I've been saving up for a place to settle for some time now. Just never found the right spot until recently." "What changed your mind?" Sage asked, though something in his eyes made her heart beat faster with anticipation of his answer. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I think you know, Sage. These past weeks, getting to know you, helping you rebuild your herbs collection, learning about your life, it's been the happiest I've been in a very long time." "I've felt the same," Sage admitted softly. "I was so alone after grandmother died. I didn't realize how much I missed having someone to talk to share my days with." "I meant what I said back at your cabin," Lucas continued, his voice earnest. "When I'm with you, everything seems brighter. Even on the darkest days, you bring light." He squeezed her hands gently. "The night I came for you, when that storm was raging and that mob was at your door, I knew I couldn't let anything happen to you. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because somehow, even then, I felt drawn to you." Sage felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I felt so lost that night," she whispered. "So afraid and alone, then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known I was making." Lucas reached up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "I know it's fast," he said. "We've only known each other a short time, but I've lived enough to know when something is real, when it matters. And this you matter to me, Sage. It matters to me too," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "More than I can say." Around them, the evening was settling over Marysvale. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the soft glow of lamps shone from the windows of nearby homes. For the first time since the night of the storm, Sage felt truly at peace. "The townspeople blamed me for the storm," she said with a small smile, "but you said I was your sunshine." Lucas's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled down at her. "And you are," he said simply, "my sunshine after the rain." Then, with infinite gentleness, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a brief, tender kiss, a promise of more to come, of a future they might build together. When they parted, Sage knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would not face them alone. And that made all the difference in the world. The days that followed the town meeting saw a flurry of activity around Sage's cabin. True to their word, townspeople came with lumber, nails, and tools to help repair the damage. Lucas took charge of the rebuilding efforts, directing the work with a carpenter's eye for detail and a leader's ability to organize. Sage was touched by how many people showed up to help. Even old man Peterson came, bringing a new rocking chair he had crafted himself as a peace offering. "Never thought you caused the storm," he grumbled as he set it in place. "Just got caught up in the foolishness of it all. My Martha would have boxed my ears if she were still alive." Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Sage said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the chair. It's beautiful craftsmanship. The old man just nodded and shuffled off to help with the roof repairs. By the end of the week, the cabin was transformed. The broken windows had been replaced, the furniture repaired or remade, and new shelves lined the walls, ready for Sage's herbs and remedies. Dr. Wilson contributed several medical texts from his own library, and Mrs. Holloway organized a group of women to sew new curtains, bedding, and towels. Through it all, Lucas was a constant presence, working from dawn till dusk on the repairs, then escorting Sage back to his cabin in the foothills where she continued to stay until her own home was fully habitable again. Their evenings together were precious times of quiet conversation, shared meals, and growing affection. I can hardly believe the change in everyone, Sage remarked one evening as they sat on the porch of Lucas's cabin, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. A month ago they wanted to run me out of town as a witch, and now they're bringing housewarming gifts. People are complicated, Lucas replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering twilight. Fear makes them do terrible things, but given a chance to reflect, most want to do right. He squeezed her fingers gently. Besides, you've helped many of them over the years. That counts for something, even if they temporarily forgot it. Sage leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she hadn't been for years. What about your land purchase? She asked. Have you heard from Mr. Finch at the bank? I have, Lucas confirmed. The paperwork should be ready next week. 20 acres with a creek running through it, good grazing land, and enough flat ground for a decent-sized house. He hesitated, then added, It's only about a half-mile from your cabin. Sage smiled, hearing the question he wasn't quite asking. Close enough for frequent visits, then. That's what I was thinking, Lucas agreed, his voice warm, to start with anyway. The implication hung in the air between them, full of promise for the future. 2 weeks after the town meeting, Sage finally moved back into her rebuilt cabin. The day was marked by an informal gathering of neighbors and friends, with food and music, and a sense of community that Sage had never quite felt before in Marysvale. Dr. Wilson made a short speech officially recognizing Sage as the town's herbalist, presenting her with a sign to hang outside her cabin. S. Lockwood, herbalist and healer. Mayor Blackburn, true to his word, offered a public apology on behalf of the town for the treatment she had endured. As the celebration wound down and people began to disperse, Lucas stayed behind, helping Sage tidy up. They worked in comfortable companionship, moving around each other with the ease of two people who had grown accustomed to sharing space. When the last plate was washed and put away, Lucas took Sage's hand and led her to the new porch swing he had built as his personal contribution to her rebuilt home. What do you think? He asked as they sat down, the swing creaking gently beneath them. Is it everything you hoped for? Sage looked around at her restored cabin, at the garden she was already replanting, at the peaceful twilight settling over Marysvale. It's better than I could have imagined, she said honestly. Not just the cabin, but everything, the way things have changed. Lucas nodded, his arms settling around her shoulders. I know what you mean. When I rode into Marysvale 2 months ago, I never expected to find a home here, just another stop on the road. He looked down at her, his eyes serious. You changed that for me, Sage. You gave me a reason to stay. Sage felt her heart swell with emotion. And you gave me a reason not to leave, even when I thought there was nothing left for me here. For a long moment, they simply sat together in the growing darkness, the swing moving gently back and forth. Then Lucas shifted, turning to face her more directly. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. A housewarming gift, I suppose you could call it. He pulled out a small object and placed it in her palm. It was a pendant on a silver chain, a small, intricately carved sunflower, the detail so fine that each tiny petal was distinct. Oh, Lucas, Sage breathed, running her finger over the delicate carving. It's beautiful. Did you make this? He nodded, a touch of color rising in his face. I've always been good with my hands. Picked up whittling as a boy, then learned some silversmithing from a man I worked with in Colorado. He took the necklace and carefully fastened it around her neck. A sunflower for my sunshine. Sage touched the pendant where it rested at the base of her throat, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'll treasure it always." Lucas took both her hands in his expression growing serious. "Sage, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. These past weeks have shown me what it means to truly care for someone, to put their needs and happiness above my own." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Sage Lockwood. And if you'll give me time to build a proper house on my land, I'd be honored to make you my wife." Sage felt as though her heart might burst with joy. "Lucas, I love you too," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And yes, I will marry you, though I'd live in a tent with you if that's all we had." His smile was brilliant in the gathering darkness. "No tent required," he assured her, pulling her close. "Just a bit of patience while I build something worthy of you." "I have all the patience in the world," Sage replied, "now that I know you'll be in my future." Their kiss sealed the promise between them, sweet and tender and full of hope for the days to come. Spring turned to summer and summer to autumn. Lucas worked tirelessly on building their home, a sturdy 2-story farmhouse with plenty of room for a family to grow. Sage divided her time between her healing practice, which flourished under the official recognition from Dr. Wilson, and helping Lucas with their future home. She planted an extensive herb garden on the property, already planning the remedies she would make in their new kitchen. They were married on a golden October day, with the aspen trees blazing yellow against the blue Colorado sky. The ceremony was held on their new land, in front of the nearly completed house. Sheriff Tate, who had become a surprising ally in the months since the storm, officiated. The entire town turned out for the celebration, a testament to how much had changed in Marysvale. Mrs. Holloway wept openly during the vows, declaring it the most romantic wedding she had seen in her 70 years. Dr. Wilson gave a toast to the healing power of love, which drew both laughter and tears from the assembled guests. Even old man Peterson was seen to wipe his eyes surreptitiously during the ceremony. After a joyous reception that lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light, Lucas carried Sage across the threshold of their new home. Though not completely finished, some of the interior walls still needed plastering, and the upstairs rooms were mostly empty. It was solid and warm and theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jackson," Lucas said, setting her gently on her feet in the front hall. Sage looked around at the house they had built together, at the man she now called husband, and felt a completeness she had never known before. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with all the love and hope she felt. "Yes, it is." Their life together unfolded with the seasons. The house was finished before the first snow fell, and they weathered their first winter in comfort, planning for the spring and the years beyond. Lucas raised horses, quickly gaining a reputation for his skill in training them. Sage's healing practice continued to grow, with people coming from neighboring towns to seek her remedies. When spring arrived again, Sage planted an even larger garden, adding flowers among the herbs, sunflowers predominant among them, a living echo of the pendant she wore always at her throat. Lucas built a workshop beside the house where he crafted furniture for their home and occasionally for neighbors who admired his workmanship. In the summer of 1880, their first child was born, a son they named James, after Lucas's father. He had Lucas's blue eyes and Sage's determined spirit, and from his earliest days showed a fascination with the natural world that delighted both his parents. Life wasn't always easy. There were droughts that threatened the crops, harsh winters that tested their resources, and the occasional lingering prejudice from those few in town who still viewed Sage with suspicion. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their love growing stronger with each passing day. On the anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, Lucas took Sage for a picnic on a hilltop overlooking their land. James, now 2 years old, played nearby, chasing butterflies through the summer grass. "Do you ever think about that night?" Lucas asked as they watched their son's antics. When the storm came and everything changed, Sage leaned against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "Sometimes, it was the worst night of my life, and yet," she smiled up at him, "it brought me to you, so I can't regret it." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "The townspeople blamed you for the storm," he said softly, "but from the moment I saw you, you were my sunshine." Sage's smile widened. "And you were mine," she replied, "the light that guided me through the darkness." In the distance, thunder rumbled a summer storm approaching from the west, but neither of them felt any fear. They had weathered far worse together, and they would face whatever came next with the same strength and love that had carried them this far. James ran back to them, breathless with excitement over a frog he had discovered. As Lucas scooped their son into his arms, pointing out the gathering clouds and explaining how the rain helped the crops grow, Sage watched them with a heart full to bursting. The storm that had once nearly destroyed her life had instead given her everything she had ever wanted: a loving husband, a beautiful child, a community that valued her skills, and a home filled with warmth and light. Out of darkness had come the brightest sunshine, proving that even the fiercest storms eventually pass, leaving renewed life in their wake. And as the first fat raindrops began to fall, the Jackson family gathered their picnic and headed home together, walking arm in arm beneath the wide Colorado sky, no longer afraid of the storm, but grateful for the rainbow that would surely follow.